Please write them on the cards which are at your table and send them up to me. I'll ask as many as time permits. You should know that our speaker next Monday will be Senator Robert Dole, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. And on Thursday, our speaker will be Alan Newharth, chairman and president of the Gannett Company, which has just introduced a new national newspaper. Now for the introduction of our distinguished head table guests. If you will withhold your applause until I've finished introducing them all, and if they would stand as I call their names. The Washington Bureau Chief of the Scripps League newspapers who organized today's luncheon, Lee Roderick. The United States Deputy Chief of Protocol, Thomas Nassif. The Minister of Trade of the Philippines, His Excellency Roberto Ungpin. National Editor of Hearst Newspapers, Joseph Kingsbury Smith. The Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, the Honorable John Holdridge. The Ambassador of the Philippines, His Excellency Benjamin T. Romualdez. Publisher of the Washington Times, Jim Whalen. The Minister of Information of the Philippines, His Excellency Gregoria Sendanya. United Press International Diplomatic Correspondent, Jim Anderson. United States Senator from Hawaii, the Honorable Daniel K. Inouye. Prime Minister of the Philippines, His Excellency Cesar Virata. From Crane Communications, the Chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, Stanley Cohen. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, His Excellency Carlos Romulo, I'm sorry. The Associated Press Diplomatic Correspondent, George Guetta. The Minister of Defense of the Philippines, His Excellency Juan Ponce Enrile. American Ambassador to the Philippines, the Honorable Michael Armacost. President of the National Press Club of the Philippines, Ben Rodriguez. Assistant General Counsel, International Affairs of the Treasury Department, Russell Monk. And the Chicago Tribune Diplomatic Correspondent, John McClain. Thank you. Our speaker today is the President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. It has been 16 years since President Marcos came to the United States on an official visit, and 16 years since we first welcomed him to our podium at the National Press Club. When he appeared before us then, he had just been elected president of the former American colony, which became an independent nation in 1946. We knew Marcos was a war hero. He got so many medals in World War II that when the young Major Marcos met four-star General Omar Bradley, the general saluted him. We also knew he was a persuasive fellow. How else could he have managed to get his wife, who is known to be strong and bright, to marry him after they'd known each other for only 11 days? And we knew he was experienced in overcoming political adversity. After all, the first case Mr. Marcos ever won as a lawyer was when he successfully defended himself from prison against a charge of murdering a political opponent of his father. The president of the press club at that time, Win Booth, remarked at the great warmth of the greeting Mr. Marcos received in 1966 and said, and I quote, "Your very presence reminds us that you and your great people are the faithful allies of our country in time of trouble. And that, sir, is something the American people and the men and women assembled in this room are not about to forget," end quote. But much has happened in those 16 years. In the interim, Mr. Marcos declared martial law, or what he called constitutional authoritarianism, and did not lift it for 11 years. There have been charges of corruption, abuses of human rights, and political repression, and recently the Archbishop of Manila called openly for him to resign. But through it all, Mr. Marcos has remained president, and this week, President Reagan warmly welcomed him, stressing the many common ties between the two countries. The New York Times recently said, quote, "In a country that is deeply sensitive to style, Ferdinand Marcos has it, and it has allowed him to take the sweeping actions that in essence converted the nation from an ill-functioning, raucous but free democracy into his personal fief and seemingly permanent possession, end quote. President Marcos comes to us today as the head of a nation with a long friendship with the United States, a nation considered crucial to America's defense strategies in Asia. We are eager to hear what Mr. Marcos has to say. It's my pleasure to present to you Ferdinand Marcos, President of the Philippines.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. Distinguished guests, my friends. It certainly is gratifying that in the course of my present visit to the United States, I should once again be accorded the opportunity to meet with the people who understand me or misunderstand me most. I'd like to thank all of you. I remember that our relationship, the relationship between the two countries can be opened up at one of 2 points by the historian or the curious investigator into world events. One, the military, which was Admiral or then Commodore Dewey, sinking the Spanish fleet under Montojo on May 1st, 1898 in Manila Bay, and with the help of the Filipino revolutionaries under General or President Emilio Aguinaldo, who then proclaimed the first Philippine Republic. Incidentally, President Emilio Aguinaldo was the grandfather of Prime Minister Cesar Virata, who is here. My grandfather only commanded the revolutionary forces. We have changed places since then. Either that point of entry is chosen or the more sedate commercial one 100 years back. 1796, the brig Astrea, sailing out of Salem, Massachusetts, towards Lisbon, and then to Manila, selling her wares there for 5 months, carrying that amateur and self-taught mathematician and navigator, Nathaniel Blow-Ditz, whom you must have heard, who later in 1806 authored The Practical American Navigator, for he had discovered the simple way of determining longitude through the long voyage across the Pacific. The American government bought the rights after 2 editions, and it has become standard text for all those who study salesmanship from Kings Point to Annapolis. Either way, it has been dramatic and historic, and it was always to be so. There was always extreme on both sides, enmity, if not enmity, extreme friendship, a relationship of love, hate. And this is my fate and destiny. I thank you all for this privilege and this honor. It may be said that an official journal like mine ought always to visit with this press association, for, as someone once observed correctly, the American press is, of course, the 4th branch of government in this country. And then also it is well to remember that the so-called solicitude with which Americans regard developments in the Philippines is perhaps now were more pronounced than in the devoted reportage by the American press on our country. This keen of the American interest of the American press notwithstanding, there is, I fear, some confusion in this country of what is happening in the Philippines today. It has been one of the shocks I encountered while preparing for my present journey, and also upon arrival here in Washington, to read in one of your outstanding papers a statement to the effect that the Philippines is still under military rule, which it is not, and that there is no civil government. Such misstatements, whether intended or otherwise, conveniently merge with more accurate reporting about the true situation in the country, resulting in much confusion and misimpressions about our country, require clarification. So perhaps I should begin by stating first a few basic facts about our country without too much embroidery. The Philippines is a republican state with a duly elected government at national and community level. We have a national constitution duly drafted by a constitutional convention, elected and convened in 1970, and duly ratified by our people in 1973. Under that constitution, ours is a modified form of presidential government with a National Assembly constituted by assemblymen elected by regions in 1978, and a president directly elected by the people in 1981. Legislative power is vested in that National Assembly, while the executive power is vested in the president. And the party in power, the party that won the most number of members in this National Assembly, choose the leader of the legislature, and the leader is the Prime Minister, and he's no other than Prime Minister Cesar Virata. We have an independent judiciary which is under the full supervision of a Supreme Court. While it is claimed that human rights are not protected by the courts, or that civil rights are not duly enhanced by the Constitution, because there is no way of seeking, say, the remedy of a writ of habeas corpus. The truth of the matter is anyone can petition for a writ of habeas corpus in the Philippines. In fact, all those who have been apprehended as having brought in hundreds and hundreds of firearms bought from the